Blackouts continue, and the cost of living is on the rise, along with inflation, the petrol price, and interest rates. Economic conditions for businesses in South Africa are indeed tough. So how can they flourish in an environment in which the state seems increasingly hostile towards the private sector? Is it possible for corporate South Africa to build an independent business community to negate the incompetence in some spheres of government? David Ansara is the Chief Operating Officer of the Center for Risk Analysis, joining us now this afternoon. Good afternoon, David. I guess one would say business and government have always had a very interesting, complex relationship, and sometimes tense, sometimes good. Government also speaking the language of private-public partnerships. What do you believe should the role of business be in relation to the state?
Well, as you mentioned, Dan, the hostility of the business environment in South Africa that many firms have to deal with on a day-to-day basis is becoming increasingly more onerous. So we're seeing across various municipalities, financial mismanagement, misgovernance, leading to a breakdown in basic services. So Nelson Mandela Bay is running out of water. It's not just because of the drought. When the floods hit Durban, washes away many thousands of homes and businesses because the infrastructure just can't cope. Then at the policy level, we have a number of constraining policies. So if you consider, for example, the highly centralized nature of energy provision, Eskom is the only game in town. When Eskom isn't working, the lights go out across the country. We have a very highly restrictive labor regulatory framework. That means that it's very difficult for businesses to hire and fire new workers, to fire delinquent workers when they're underperforming. Trade unions are very strong. Labor protections there are very strong for incumbent workers, but that locks out many millions of unemployed people. Unemployment levels now at about 35%, much higher for young people. If you're between the age of 15 and about 25, you're more likely to be without a job than in a job. So this ecosystem that we're operating in for businesses is extremely damaging. On top of that, you have BEE laws, threats around expropriation without compensation that don't seem to be going away. The list is very long, Dan.
Yeah, but some of these measures have been brought about to redress the imbalances of the past, like BEE, for example. There's lots of criticism today, the fact that it's benefiting just an elite group of people, and people have said it should have been broad-based, and there's been all kinds of attempts. So it's all around transforming the economy and including in that economy people who were previously excluded. But you are saying that those policies are seemingly hamstringing business today?
Well, Dan, if you look at the rates of inequality within the country, if you look at the black group, actually inequality levels have increased since 2006. The Gini coefficient, that is a measure of inequality that is used around the world, 0 being perfectly equal and 1 being perfectly unequal. The black race group was at 0.6 Gini coefficient. It's now gone up to 0.63 in 2015. That's according to Stats SA's inequality trends report. So, you know, the picture that emerges there is that BEE just simply isn't working. It's, as you said, enriched a very small politically connected elite. If you look at that term, black economic empowerment, that second E is actually quite misleading. It should be a P because it's black political empowerment. So what happens with BEE is it's almost a form of state capture, not how we traditionally think of state capture, the Guptas and so on, but rather capture by the state of business. It has been used by the state to take control of the sovereignty of businesses, their commercial decision-making, their ability to respond to market signals. That's been substituted by compliance with officials and politicians in Pretoria. So business now has its ban from Pretoria.
But hasn't business been part of the problem there? Just as you've said, that last part you're talking about, that instead of pushing government to do the right thing in terms of business, they've been cozying up to government to land those lucrative contracts and comply with regulation. They've sort of aided this state of affairs. Hasn't business been responsible partly as well?
Well, I think you're onto something. That there's a very cozy relationship often between particularly big business and government, because the president himself is a big fan of this kind of consensus-seeking, stakeholder engagement, having all of the role players in the same room. And what happens in these forums is that big incumbent businesses and government, and often established labor unions as well, come to an agreement of sorts, whether it's a wage agreement in a collective bargaining council or some of these high-level policy engagements like these investment forums and so on. Often that suits the incumbents at the expense of smaller and emerging businesses. Now, I don't want to bash business too much. I mean, if you look around you, you see that in many respects, business is fulfilling the core role that the state traditionally performed in terms of its basic functions. When I go on my morning run through the suburbs of Johannesburg, I see potholes that have been filled in by Discovery Insure. The same company is also now sponsoring fire trucks in the city of Johannesburg. So now we see business playing that really critical role of filling the void left by the retreating state. And I think that that's very important. But business is also now starting to find its voice, Dan, and we can talk about that in a moment and why that's so important.
Unfortunately, David, you won't be able to talk about that in a moment. Maybe another day. I would like to talk about that business voice, because a few years ago, I remember Dr. Roel Khoza was chairman of Nedbank. When he criticized the governing party, he was hauled over the coals at Luthuli House, and not a single pip from the world of business to defend him when he was being taken to task by the ANC then Secretary General Gwede Mantashe. But we'll talk about that one day, about the South African business finding its voice finally today. Thank you very much, David Ansara, Chief Operating Officer of the Center for Risk Analysis. Now,